Hi, the first thing you want to do is make your computer as fast as possible and then also organize all your clips to make it as efficient as possible. The last thing you want is an unorganized setup with a laggy computer. It's going to kill your editing workflow and it's going to make it feel more like a chore than something that's fun to do. So think about how you like to organize your clips. So today we'll go ahead and look at how I film tutorials. Now for those, what I do is I split them into the tutorial itself, which is just me talking, sitting at my desk, and then I'll split it into B-roll and then gameplay. Actually, a fourth one that I usually do as well is overhead shots. And then when you open up Premiere Pro, click on New Project, and then you can title it whatever you want. And this, I'll name it Root Tutorial. Click OK. And then in Premiere Pro, we go to File, Import. Go to your folder where all of the clips are. And then if you are on a Mac, go ahead and click on the Command key, which will let you select multiple folders. Or Control if you're on a PC. So B-roll gameplay tutorial, click import. That's going to take some time. And now all your folders are going to be put in this bottom left panel here, which is your project panel. What you can do next is right click and then click on proxy and then create proxies. Okay, so this is one reason why I actually like to start the editing process at night, because making proxies take forever. And that way everything is ready for you in the morning. Now proxies are just temporary placeholders. They're pretty much low resolution clips of your original clips. But don't worry, because by the time you finish editing and everything, when you export out your entire video, what Premiere is going to do is reattach those proxies. That way you get the original resolution of your clips. Proxies for now will just speed up your workflow because it won't be as laggy. And of course, low resolution means easier playback and it won't stutter across too much along the timeline. So most of us don't have the fastest computer. Proxies will solve almost all of your speed problems. And the last thing about proxies is that Adobe is going to open up a program called Adobe Media Encoder. That's the one that's going to convert your clips into proxies. Once that is done and finished, that's when you head back into Premiere. And then in order to turn on those proxies, you're going to click on this button here called Toggle Proxies. If it's highlighted, it means it's going to now use proxies instead of your original clips. If it's not there, you can always click on this plus button right here and then put the Toggle Proxy button right on this layout. Second thing you can do is adjust which renderer your computer is going to use. In order to do that, you're going to go to File, Project Settings, General, and then under Video Rendering and Playback, you'll see an option, a drop-down menu here that says Renderer. Yes, of course, it does depend on the type of computer you have to see which renderer works best for your setup. But let's break down these three real quick. So if you have an option that says CUDA, that's a NVIDIA graphics card, and if you have that option, feel free to use that one. I think that one's the fastest out of all three. CUDA will support that specific graphics card in your system. Second in line, if you have OpenCL, usually it's for AMD or ATI. Those are also different graphics cards. That one I would say I think is second in terms of speed. Apple has phased out OpenCL and now we only run Metal on any Apple system. So that's why under this listing here, it shows that Metal is the recommended option. And lastly, you also have software only mode. That one is typically the slowest out of all the rendering options. Okay, now all the fancy terminology aside, what you're doing here is optimizing the playback of your computer to make sure it's as fast as possible. So if you're pressing play and it's kind of stuttery, or if your timeline has a bunch of red and yellow on it, these are two things you can do: proxies and adjust your renderer. Now, the third thing you can do to help optimize the speed of your Adobe is also go to this drop-down menu here in the bottom right corner. And here it shows the playback resolution. If 1/8 and 1/16 is highlighted, you of course can drop it down even further. But for me, the lowest I can go to is 1/4 of the resolution quality. I always put the lowest for my computer setup because I want to make sure that my timeline is as fast as possible. And if doing all those three don't work, you can also just press enter on your keyboard, and what's going to do is it's going to render out your timeline temporarily, just like this. And you can always cancel it depending on where you are on the timeline. So your timeline is then going to go from a yellow or red bar to a green bar afterwards. So this is just a temporary video preview. It basically tells your computer to quickly be able to play back what is on your timeline currently. So proxies, renderer, adjust the resolution, and then pressing enter to temporarily render out your timeline. Those four options are four different ways that have worked for me in order to speed up my editing workflow. Okay, now in Premiere, you want to be able to visualize everything that you're working with. Just like how chefs have everything they need at the kitchen table before they start cooking, you want to do the same exact thing here when you are editing. So in order to do that, you want to go to Window, Workspaces, and then click on All Panels. This lets you see everything from the project panel to the timeline to the main video preview to the clip preview, if that's something you want to see, to effects, and then everything on the right as well, from essential graphics to all the color options and titles. So when I'm editing, I want to be able to see everything all at once. Instead of giving you a bunch of hotkeys and facts to memorize, we're just going to edit together this tutorial. And as the hotkeys come up, then it will make more sense to why you're using those hotkeys at that point in time. So let's get to the fun part, which is actually editing your video. The first thing you're going to do is highlight your clip, and then when you double click it, you'll see a preview in this left corner over here. So if you know a specific part of the clip that you want to use, you can press I, and if you know where the end is, you can press O. So that way, when you drag your clip on your timeline, you will only get that specific portion. That makes it easy and way faster. But if not, you can just clear this out, and you can drag the entire clip onto your timeline. And then the very first thing I do is optimize the audio. So here I am using a Rode Video Mic Pro Plus. I went through a ton of microphones, and this one so far has worked for me the longest and has given me the least amount of trouble. I've had actually no trouble at all with this specific microphone, which I will link down below if you're interested. All you have to do for this one literally is just plug it into your camera and you are pretty much set to go. Without any kind of editing, it already sounds amazing. Now, without any kind of audio editing at all, it sounds like this. And then you want to go ahead and choose a faction that you want to play with. The game does come with 4 base factions, but we're going to go ahead and start off with 2 specific ones today. And then you want to go ahead and choose a faction that you want to play with. The game does come with 4 base factions, but we're going to go ahead and start off with 2 specific ones today. If you want a better breakdown and reasoning as to why we're doing this audio fix, go ahead and check out this video. I'm just going to show you the numbers you need to know. That way you can just drag and drop it onto your video to make it sound that much better. So you're going to go to your effects panel, type in multi for multi-band compressor, and then you're going to drag that right onto your clip. And then you'll have an option that'll show up in your left panel that'll show you what kind of effect that you dragged onto your clip. In this case, it was the multi-band compressor. So you go to edit. Under this drop-down menu, you want to go ahead and click on a random effect for now. Premiere does this weird thing where you have to click on it twice. So just click on some random effect and then go back and click on broadcast. So this is the option that we want in order to make our audio sound that much more crispy and amazing. Under attack, make that 1, release, make that 250. Now once you're done, go ahead and click on the X, and then under this effect, you're gonna go ahead and highlight multi-band compressor, right click, click on save preset, and then name it whatever you want. So here I already made one, which is called audio fix. And then once you make a preset, it'll be saved under the effects panel. So whatever you name it, you can just search it. And then for this one, I called it audio fix, which now I'm going to drag onto the timeline, and boom. So now here are a couple more hotkeys for you to know. I actually use the Razer Naga Chroma, which has like little keys here on the side that I hotkey to. This is more of a personal preference that's actually just started using recently that completely sped up my workflow. I hotkeyed number 1 in order for you to delete. So as you can see here, when I click on multi-band compressor, instead of taking my hand off of the keyboard and going onto the delete button, instead I can just click on number 1 and then it deletes it right away. So when you add up all those seconds of you moving your hand back and forth to click on the delete button, it saves that much time. Let me introduce 2 more hotkeys that I use. I also put number 12 and number 10 on my mouse to zoom in and zoom out on your timeline. That way, instead of going here, if you drag this to the right, it lets you see your entire timeline. Now before we go on, in case you want to program any kind of keyboard shortcuts, let me show you how. So you go to Premiere Pro, and then if you click on keyboard shortcuts, it'll bring up a list of every single shortcut that is listed by default. And then if you scroll down in this panel over here and you go to sequence, there are 2 that I really like, which is zoom in and zoom out. This will save you a ton of time. So this one is set to equal sign and one is set to the dash. And then I programmed it from the Razer itself. So that way number 12 and number 10 is the equal sign and the dash. So every time I click on these 2 keys, it will zoom in and zoom out on the timeline. Every time I click on one, it will delete. So you can play with this, and then as you progress in your video editing, you can of course start getting used to more and more keyboard shortcuts. In the meantime, if you don't want to use a keyboard shortcut, what you can do is, so if you click on this slider right here in the bottom, if you drag it inwards, it will zoom in. If you drag it out, then it will zoom out. If you hotkey it, then just pressing one button will zoom in or zoom out on your timeline. And then pressing one, in this case for me, will delete it. We added in the audio. We introduced a few hotkeys. What do we do first in our video? Well, so I mess up a lot in my videos. It takes me like 10 takes before I say like one sentence in general. I always make my last take the best take, which saves me time in editing. So I just skip all the parts I messed up in the beginning and just find my final take. So for example, for this one, a couple other things to note. A couple other things to note is what I said. And these are all just introductions of me saying this. So what I can do now is press C on my keyboard, click on that part of the timeline, and then I can just delete that. And then I go back and press V. When you press V, it goes back to your mouse. C is cut. V is back to your mouse. You can take your clip and drag it all the way to the beginning. So now you have one part that you're going to keep in your video. Now what helps a lot is I like to make this part of the timeline really big because it lets you visualize the sound peaks of when you start and stop talking. Clearly, these are the two parts that I messed up on. So if I analyze those wavelengths, about right here is where I actually need the clip. So I'm going to delete that and drag this forward. And then what I also like to do is, as this is playing back, I'm listening to it and I start cutting them as I play. So for example, I'll let this play together. A couple other quick little delete that. Move this forward. It's taking the damage, gets to choose which. Delete that. So basically, as this is playing, I just try to edit all the sequences of the parts I know I'm not going to need in the main video. So I'll press spacebar and play. The player that is taking the damage gets to choose which. The very first thing I do is just cut out all the parts I don't need and only keep what is necessary. In terms of my process, that's what I like to do first. And then when I finish, I get something that looks like this. So these are all the clips that I've cut together. Now one button I found very, very helpful is actually A. A is going to select everything that you click on and to the right of what you've clicked on. So if I press A and I click on this clip shown here, it's going to highlight everything to the right of this. Even if this part drags in the beginning, as long as it continues forward, it's also going to highlight that as well. So if I don't want to move my song, I'm just going to click on V and then hold Shift to deselect that and deselect my color grades. So let's go ahead and move all these clips to beginning so I can show you how I progress from there. Now next up are transitions. There are a ton of ways you can manipulate your transitions. Some basic ones are all listed in the effects panel here. So if you go to effects and you can type in some ones that you should know at least are cross dissolve. That one I use often, that's pretty much the fade. There's also black. And if you scroll all the way down, then there is a dip to black. And same thing with white. There's also a dip to white as well. In order to use these, you just take the transition, drag it onto your clip. And if you put it at one point of your clip here, that means it's only going to affect the beginning portion of your clip shown here. But if you put it in the middle, then that means it's going to transition from the end of the previous clip and the beginning of the next clip. So those are basic transitions. There are a ton that you can use. I mostly use fade to black, fade to white, and cross dissolve. For video, for audio, you should use exponential fade. So for example, when I am transitioning my audio from the end of B-roll to the main segment of the video, then I'm going to type in exponential fade in the effects panel, drag that onto the end here, and then you can adjust your transition to make it as long as you want. So either you can highlight your mouse over here to make it ease in more gradually, or you can right click, set duration, and then you can change how long your transition is going to go for. Now I want to go over a couple other basic techniques before we talk about exporting your video. The first is a keyframe. Now here I am linking my social media on my video. I want them to gradually fade in. You can manipulate a ton of different features for your clips. Let me explain. So if you highlight your picture and you go to opacity and you click on this little marker right here, it's going to set a keyframe. A keyframe is your start and stop points. So if I click on one keyframe here, that means the transition is going to start at 0% opacity. And then if I drag the arrow this way, then I set another keyframe here and I'll set that at 100% opacity, which means it's going to gradually fade in. So if you look at the Twitter icon, so first, right, we start off at 0, and then as I move in the timeline, you'll notice a number gradually increases. Premiere will automatically calculate that depending on where you put your keyframe. So now you have your picture that gradually fades into the scene. And then you can always adjust this. So if you want it to be faster, you can drag your ending keyframe closer. So now it's going to appear way quicker. Or if you want it slower, you can do that too by just dragging this out further away. See? Pretty cool, huh? Now that is a very, very, very important characteristic and tool that you have to understand about using Premiere. When you understand how to use keyframes, it's going to change your video editing completely. Now the thing is, you don't always have to use a keyframe for opacity. You can use it for anything that's listed here with the little clock icon. You can use it for position. You can use it for scale, how big and small you want it. So let's go ahead and play with that. So I show you. Let's say you want the Twitter icon to move all the way to the right of the screen. So now I'm going to set position. Now this is where it's going to start off. Halfway through, I want it to move all the way to the right. So this number here is your x-axis. The right number is your y-axis. So I'm going to move this all the way to the right. I can drag it, or I can also click on it and put a specific number. And let's say we want to move it to the top right corner. So if I drag that up, now it's going to adjust and make it into a diagonal as if the bird is flying into the corner. See? So as it fades in, it also is going to move to that direction. Now let's also make it bigger. So let's say I want to set a keyframe for scale. Right now the scale is at 12.2. Let's say I want it to be way bigger by the time it reaches this point. So I'll make that 30. And then I'll go ahead and drag this down as well. So you can see the whole icon in the corner. Playing that back, we get that. So scale, position, opacity are probably the most common ones that I keyframe. But you can also keyframe a ton of other things. You can keyframe rotation, a ton of options you can use to play with keyframes. Now what else would you need before you start video editing? There are 3 different things I want to mention about music. First off is your volume. Right click this, go to audio gain, and then adjusting gain right here is going to be set in decibels, of course, because that is the unit for sound. You want to be careful here. In general, you want to keep your music to float around 12 decibels, but I put it way lower if you are doing a tutorial or a review, because you don't want your music to be louder than your own voice, and then it gets distracting for the viewer. So your voice is what should be at around 12. So if you mute this real quick. Got my social media linked right here. So see, it kind of floats around 12. In order to do that, you just right click on the audio clip, audio gain, and then you can adjust it accordingly so it floats around 12. What I usually do for music is set it between -38 to -45 decibels if I am putting it to overlay me talking. Now let's say I want to fade out the music gradually at specific points. You can put your mouse over the line shown here, and then if I press Command or Control, it's going to bring up a little plus icon for your mouse. So now you can click on one point here, you can click on another point here, and another point over here. So I can make the music fade out by just dragging these down at specific points. This little icon, just like zoom in, zoom out, works for horizontal. This is the zoom in, zoom out for vertical. And then I can make one more point to gradually fade it out over here. So that's how we adjust the volume. That is how we fade in, fade out specifically. And one other important thing to note is, let's say you want a song to play for 20 minutes of your entire video, just one song, but you don't want to keep putting in different breaks of the same song. What you can do is you right click the song and you go to edit clip in Adobe Audition. So now Adobe is going to bring up a different program, and in Adobe Audition, you're going to click on File, New, Multi-Track Session. This I learned from Peter McKinnon. I mean, I learned most of this actually from Peter McKinnon, but this specifically he covered in his video. Didn't even know about it until he brought it up. So File, New, Multi-Track Session, click OK. You're gonna take your song, drag it onto your timeline, and let's say you want to extend it and make it, instead of 2 minutes, you want to make it 30 minutes. You're gonna click on Enable Remix, and then target duration, instead of, in this case it was 26 seconds, we'll make it 20 minutes. It's gonna take some time, and then from there, Now you have an extended track, and you're gonna go to File, Export, and then export to Adobe Premiere Pro. That means it's going to bring it back to your timeline here, and then you'll have an extended song that you can drag onto your timeline. Okay, my face is all red from spitting out so much knowledge. Okay, next let's talk about the clips themselves. Now when you're editing a video, there are often different frame rates that you use. Frame rates relate to how fast your clip is. So the higher the frame rate, then the more frames per second is captured in that image. How does that make any sense? Well, our eyes will naturally see 24 frames per second. That is the most natural camera settings. So most of the time on your timeline, you're going to be using 24 FPS. In order to check that, you just right click, aside from checking your camera of course, you're gonna right click on your clip, go to modify, and then interpret footage. From there, it will show you what your frame rate was at. 23.9798, it's pretty much the same as 24. So I just leave it at that normally. That's for typical footage, but let's say you were filming in slow motion, 60 FPS on your camera, or 120 FPS like I shoot often on my 1DX. So if you're filming on that footage, two things can happen when you right click, modify, interpret footage. One, they can already be set at 120 frames per second. If so, and you bring it down to 24, then it's going to slow down your clip. However, sometimes, like for the 1DX that I'm shooting now, even if you shoot at 120, it will set the frame rate at 29.97 FPS as shown here. So if you want to slow it down even more than 120, you only have a little bit of flexibility because you'll be able to bring it down from 29 to 24. But to summarize, use 24 for your timeline. For example, if I'm talking to you right now, that is a 24 FPS timeline. So just stick with 24 if you don't want to play with slow motion just yet. Now that was frame rates. Let's talk about color grading. Color grading, I would say, is my most favorite part of video editing. This is when your footage comes to life. Just like when you're editing for photos, color grading for video is very similar. Now I can talk about color grading in like 10 videos worth of footage. So to give you a brief overview of how I color grade, first you want to go to the bottom left corner, click on New Item, and then you're going to click on Adjustment Layer. When you use an adjustment layer, it's pretty much like a mask over your footage. So it's going to overlay whatever clip that you have with whatever kind of effects that you put on it. In this case, we want to color our footage. So New Item, Adjustment Layer, and then you'll have this pink layer that's the default shown here. From there, I'm going to click on Lumetri Color and click on Basic Correction. And now you can adjust all of your settings. So for example, this is what it looks like without a color grade. So that looks like really gross. But with a color grade, here's what you get. Now to do it step by step, let me show you how I edit my own. The color grade depends on a million different things. It depends on your camera settings, depends on your camera itself, depends on your lens, depends on your monitor. A lot of factors go into color grading. But if you understand these basic tools, which are very similar to photo editing, then you can apply it to your own setup. So exposure, I don't want to change that. It's already bright enough. It's already well lit. Contrast, I turn up so it separates me from the background. Highlight, I'll leave alone. Shadows, I raised this up a bit because initially it was pretty dark right in the background, but now I want to liven it up, bring up the shadows. Whites, I tone down so there's not too much of a glare on my face. So I tone the whites down and also tone the blacks down to make more of a contrast for like my hoodie and the table. If I turn it up, you'll see we'll have this like hazy looking effect. It works for certain videos. For a tutorial, I'd rather have all the blacks just turned down so it really accentuates whatever board game I'm showing on the table or product. Now, if you go down to curves, so normally I actually adjust curves first, but I only made slight changes here, which is why I didn't go over it first. But normally you would want a S-shaped curve. So here I made this kind of curve. The bottom half here are the shadows, and up top here are the highlights. So I very slightly adjust these. Reason for that is because they make drastic changes. For example, if I pull this up, like look now my forehead and like face up top is like super ugly. I don't know what other word to use. It's ugly. So very minor adjustments to your S-curve. One part that really pulls your footage and makes it really stand out depending on your color scheme. For me, I have these teal walls. So I like to pull up the saturation which is right here. So what I do is under this curve right here, it says hue versus saturation. So hue is the color that you're looking at. In this case, let's say I'm looking at blue. Saturation is how deep or how intense you want that color to be. So in my case, I have like a blue-green wall. I'm going to pull up that saturation. And for my skin tone, I want to make sure I keep it the same, which is why I left orange right about at the baseline here. I'm going to be really careful with skin tone. And then the second thing I adjust is hue versus luma. So hue versus saturation is the color choice and how intense you want that color to be. Hue versus luma is the color choice again versus how bright or how much light you want to introduce into that specific color. So if I look at my skin tone here, I brought it up just a little bit so it's a little bit brighter on my face. If I tone it down, of course, it gets darker. If I go all the way up, it gets lighter. I want to keep it relatively what my own skin tone is. So I just raise it just a little bit, and that right there is my hue versus luma. There are other options that you can adjust, but those are, I would say, the most important ones that you should know. Now from curves, I go back into creative and I leave sharpen alone. Sharpen is how detailed you want your image to be. You don't want it to be too much detail because then it looks fake. So I kind of leave that alone. I raise my vibrance a bit and my saturation a bit, which is something I wouldn't normally do in photo, but in video, since everything is filmed in a log profile, log means it has this desaturated look to it, then I would want to raise my saturation and vibrance to accommodate for that. And then the last thing I want to mention too, if you didn't already fix your white balance in your camera, you can also adjust for it in your footage in Premiere Pro by going to the temperature slider here and bring it from wherever it was originally. If you want it more warm, more orange, you can raise it up. If you want it more blue, which is typically what I like, then I crank it down to right about there. And lastly, for Lumetri color, you want to save all of these formats that way you don't have to change it every single time. So you right click in this little panel here, click on Save Preset, and then you can name it to whatever you want. I named mine Studio Blue, so if you go back to Effects, type in Studio, and you'll see all of my different looks here. So here I have Studio Blues, and I can just take that and drag it right onto your adjustment layer. So that way, if you're filming in your studio and you have the same look and same color and same light every single time, all you have to do is drag and drop that preset right into your adjustment layer, bam, save tons of time. So we made a preset for audio, we made a preset for video. Look how much time that saves. Next up is text, which I covered extensively in the intro video, but I'll go over it real quick one more time here. All you have to do is click T on your keyboard and it'll bring up this little panel here. And a lot of the times this is something you'll use, so you can just type whatever you want. Whatever you want. And then in order to move it, all you have to do is go to the effects panel to the left, highlight position, and then you can move it anywhere you want. Make sure that you're highlighting the program panel up top here, because sometimes when you're in the reference panel, you're like, oh, where did the text go? You just click on the program icon and you'll see it right here. So that is where you'll put position. You can make it bigger using scale here, but this makes the entire clip itself big. If you want to just make the font big, what you can do is click on your text, go to Essential Graphics, double click on your T here, and then you'll have options for making the text itself bigger. You can center it, shown here. You can change the fonts. You can change the color of the fill. You can change the stroke color. So many things you can do here with fonts. You can rotate it, and we talked about it earlier, you can set keyframes. So let's say I want to move it from the top to the bottom in a couple seconds. I'll go to the front of the clip, click on position. So now it's going to be right here, but I want it to move down right around here. So now I'm going to move the y-axis, which is right here, drag that down. And now we play it back, we see this.
Meme order, MEAV, meaning the Marquise cat.
There, so that's how you can move your position. Again, you can adjust for scale. You can adjust opacity to make it fade in whenever you want. There are a lot of things you can manipulate in Premiere to let you do what you want to do. Now let's say you want to point out a specific part in your clip. I want to highlight this cat icon shown here on the screen. I want to make sure, like, as you're watching it, like, hey, pay attention to this part of the video. There are a ton of ways you can go about it. Let me show you one way. So I'm going to click on the clip itself, and then I'm going to go to Effects and type Lumetri Color. Now remember, this is when we color grade, you can actually take that specific effect and change all those factors that we just talked about for color grading. So if I go to the effects panel here and go under basic correction, let's say I want to make that area brighter. So first I'm going to click on the circle here, or you can click on a square, or you can make a custom shape using the pen tool. And I just want to make a circle here to highlight, like, hey, pay attention to the cat marker. I'm going to start at the beginning of this clip, and then I'm going to click on mask. I'm going to click on exposure and temperature. From there, I'm going to move up just a little bit, and then I'm going to raise the exposure so you can see it brighter, and then I'm going to raise the temperature. So now you have this orange looking area, and then you play it back.
First two actions. Then you want to take your victory point markers, go ahead and stack.
So now you've highlighted that area in case you want to point things out. Adjust to whatever shape you're going for, whatever color you're going for. All those things that we adjusted in color grading, you can adjust as well, shown here. Another helpful effect I found is something called magnify. So if you take magnify and drag it onto your clip, you'll have this circle shape shown here, which you can move in case you want to magnify different parts of your video. So here I'm manipulating the X and Y axis. So I want to make this bigger, so you can change the shape of it. You can magnify it less. You can magnify it more. You can change the overall size of the circle. And the last thing I want to mention before we go to export is what I like to do is also color the different footage that I have so I can organize it better. For example, the color and lighting will change if I'm filming overhead versus if I'm filming directly at me. So I like to separate the different color gradings via adjustment layer. To change that is right click adjustment layer, go to label, and then you can go to any of these labels that you have shown here. So you can change to any color you want. You can label it light blue. You can go to blue, hot pink, whatever you want. I changed the names of those colors myself though, because I couldn't stand Premiere labeling it some random color that didn't make any kind of sense. So if you want to change your own color scheme and label it however you want, all you have to do is go to Premiere, Preferences, and you go to Labels, and then you can type in any color you want. So if I want this to be lavender, then it'll change accordingly from there. And then just click on OK, and it'll save those changes. So here we are. We're about to export our amazing video so everyone can see. The question now is, how do I export my video appropriately? Let me show you. Everything is done. You want to make sure you click on your timeline because sometimes you'll get problems if you click on this screen or this screen. So make sure that you're highlighting the timeline, and then go to File, Export, Media. Let me introduce to you a third preset that saves me time. I've made this setting called YouTube 4K. So this is what I found to be so far the best quality for YouTube. So my width and my height are set at 3840 and 2160 because I want to make the output for 4K. Frame rate is set at 23.976. Your aspect, square pixels 1.0. Make sure you're checking render at maximum depth to make sure you have the highest quality video. Performance is software, profile high, level is 5.2. Bitrate I set at 100. Then you're gonna go to audio, set it to AAC. Sample rate is at 48,000. For stereo channel, audio quality is high. And then the last thing you wanna do is make sure that your maximum render quality is checked. Use previews is checked. So this one, if you've already rendered it by pressing enter, like we talked about before, it will use those previews that you've already rendered, so it'll hopefully speed up the process of exporting. And lastly, you want to go ahead and change the name of your file to whatever you like. And in order to save this preset that you've made, you just go here, click on Save Preset, and then you can label it to whatever you want. So now, aside from dragging and dropping your audio and your color grade, you also have a set preset for exporting, so you don't have to worry about it anymore. So these settings are specifically for YouTube. And then you click on Export, wait another 6 to 10 hours, upload it to YouTube, which takes another 2 to 4 hours, and finally have a video complete from start to finish. So that is the general principle of video editing. There are way more things that you can cover, but at least hopefully this will get you started. So you know a little more than just the general techniques. At least you know how to amp up your video editing just a little bit with some masks and some different video effects.
Look at you getting ahead of the game.
Honestly, putting this video together is very satisfying because I think making this video, I thought about if I were to start fresh, what would help me learn the fastest and get the tools that I need to start video editing right away. A little more than just the basic but not too much so it's not overwhelming. So I hope you found that very helpful. Please subscribe if you'd like to support this channel and see all the new techniques and videos that I have coming up soon. Can't wait to teach you all. Can't wait to show you all. Can't wait to just go on this amazing journey together. But until next time, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all later.